I asked myself, who services the helpers? Who's there to help the helpers?
Mm-hmm.
And I went from working with those who were on parole probation, diverting their jail time or in the jail, to working with the actual first responders from there.
This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 382 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and so glad you've joined us. And if this is your first time listening in, glad you found us, and I hope you'll take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. Looking forward to you hearing from my guest today. Again, it's not a new person to this podcast, but my friend Steve Bisson, who is a therapist who is up in Massachusetts. And Steve works specifically does trauma work, but specifically with the first responders. And so we talk about how he kind of happened into that niche and how he finds that important in his life and just really the importance of the work that he does. But also we talk about how his podcast, which has kind of morphed in the names over the last few years, his podcast is called Resilience, Development, and Action. And so we talk about how he moved into that particular arena and how he went through some rebranding with his podcast. So I think you'll find that interesting. And also we talk a little bit about how podcasting has helped his practice and just the work that he does. So looking forward to you hearing from Steve. And before we get to that, one of the things I'd like to make you aware of, if you're interested in doing some work with me, maybe some consulting or just doing some brainstorming and that sort of thing, I'd love to hear from you. And if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/coaching and consulting, practiceoftherapy.com/coaching and consulting, you can find out more about my offerings there with consulting. And so I'd love to hear from you by doing that. And also, before we get to my conversation with Steve, I'd love for you to hear more about some of the members of the Psychcraft Network, along with some words from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Hi there. I'm super excited to welcome you back to the brand new season of Scaling Therapy Practice podcast. This is the show where we encourage you to take deliberate steps towards sustainable growth. I'm your host, James Marland. In season 2, we're specifically focused on one main topic: marketing for mental health providers. Every week, we're going to share about different parts of marketing, giving you simple tips and tricks to grow your mental health business. Every episode from season 2 will have a download or a handout from the show. So sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss these valuable resources. Good news, I'm not going to be doing the show alone. I've got some awesome friends who are going to be joining me from the Psychcraft Network. You're going to hear from Lisa Mustard, Steve Bisson, Dawn Gabriel, and other special guests. We've joined forces for this season to share helpful advice on things we've learned and even the mistakes we've made so that you don't have to make them. As the weeks go by, listen to us cover lots of topics on marketing, such as social media, how to market your own therapist, how to speak in public, and even how to start your own podcast or even just guest on podcast shows. We really want to hear from our listeners, so send us your questions, your comments, your thoughts to james@coursecreationstudio.com. That's james@coursecreationstudio.com. Make sure you check out season 1, which is out now, and it has lots of tips on scaling your therapy practice. Just go to coursecreationstudio.com and click the podcast section. So join us every Monday. We're going to learn a lot about intentional and sustainable growth for your therapy practice.
Rachel here with a quick shout out to TherapyNotes, the EHR that Gordon uses and loves for running his group practice. If you've ever been looking for a solid, all-in-one platform to manage your notes, scheduling, billing, and even secure client messaging, this is it. Gordon's been using TherapyNotes for years, and it's honestly made a huge difference in how smooth things run behind the scenes. He's always saying how it saves him time and keeps everything organized, and as a practice owner, that's huge. And get this, they've just rolled out Therapy Fuel, which is an amazing suite of AI tools that help write your notes faster. You can generate progress notes from session summaries or even from transcriptions. You can also create contact notes straight from secure messages and automatically summarize client history forms. Basically, it's like having a little documentation assistant built right in. Plus, TherapyNotes is always adding new features like automated payments, secondary insurance billing, and a growing library of outcome measures. And if you ever get stuck, their customer service is phenomenal. Seriously, you can call or email 24/7 and talk to someone who actually knows what they're doing. So, if you've ever been thinking about switching or just getting started, now's a great time. Head over to therapynotes.com, click Start My Free Trial, and use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free. All right, back to the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so happy to have back with me on this episode, Steve Bisson. Welcome, Steve.
Oh, thank you, Gordon. Always good to be here.
Yes, and Steve and I have developed a really good friendship over the last couple of years, mainly through the development of the Sightcraft Network. And Steve is he's just a solid guy, but I'll let you get to know him and judge for yourself, which I think you will. But Steve, tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Well, my name is Steve Bisson, and it's pronounced Bisson because I'm born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I'm very proud of that. I've been in the United States for over 26 years. I have my U.S. citizenship, and I moved here to become a mental health counselor. I was going to become a mental health counselor, go back to Montreal. Turns out you fall for a girl, you have kids, and then you land in America for much longer. And really, truly love America, love being here. I have my 2 kids here. But more importantly, I have my practice. This is something that I've always wanted. Have my practice that's been going on. My private practice is 11 years, 12 years, but I've been a therapist for going on 22 years with my master's. I've worked with over 10,000 people, some of them longer than others. Some of them were just a quick screen in a jail, and some of them are 10 plus years of therapy and working together and anything in between. I work mostly with first responders. I didn't choose to be with first responders. My actual training is in children and family. And I work with 0 children or families at this point. I just work with first responders, and I work with a lot of trauma. And as I mentioned to someone else yesterday, and please don't take this out of context, don't chop it up, but I like working with women who have been through trauma because I can be that safe man that they have. And then I'm like, I can't be the only safe man in the world, and make them be much more faithful around that. So trauma, first responders, and grief. I've done with grief because I worked in a crisis team. One of my first calls as a clinician in the crisis team was going to what happened was there was a sudden death for a child, SIDS, and I was called in to help the family. And as much as that's a hard thought process and a hard thing to talk about. I really developed the knack to talk about it and work with individuals. I'm not saying it's fun. I'm not saying I hate to say I enjoy it, but I do. But not because I want this to happen to anyone to have grief, but rather help them process it so they feel, fuller, more of themselves. That's really the goal for me. So that's where my whole thought process is in regards to Steve, and that's how I landed here.
Right. And I love that. I love your story, Steve, just because I feel like there's a lot of, to some degree, some parallels just with interest in trauma and working with grief and that sort of thing. I think I've shared with you, Steve, and one of the little fun facts about me that some people that have been listening to the podcast might have heard before, but I worked in the funeral business for many years. And, just that's a whole new perspective when you're working on the helping side of helping people through some of the worst times of their life. And it's just, I find it very rewarding and just very, very, as I like to say, sacred ground in working with people in that context. But what got you interested in working with first responders? I don't know that we've ever talked about that.
Well, it's funny because that's usually what people ask me, like, how did you start working with first responder? And that's the same answer every single time, accidentally. So I'm going to try to make a short story out of it, but probably a little longer than I wish. So when I started in 1999 on the crisis team, we were interacting with police regularly for, if someone was suicidal, homicidal. I know different states have different names for them. We call them Section 12s in Massachusetts, but I know they have different names for different states. And so I got to work with them there. And as I grew and I got my master's, we were one of the first, I was part of the team that started the jail diversion program in Framingham, Massachusetts, led by Dr. Sarah Abbott. And I got to interact with police and be in the community directly so that we can avoid people who have mental illness going to jail, but rather get them treatment. They didn't get scot-free, they got treatment. And if they didn't do the treatment, there was consequences, but nonetheless. And doing that work, I sat in the vehicles with police and went to calls with fire and ambulances. And what happens is once in a while, especially the police, because that's where we technically were, there's sometimes it'd be John Doe say, "Hey, Steve, you're jumping in with me today for the ride along." Okay. Well, it's because John Doe needed to talk about some of the stuff he's going through.
Right.
And I asked myself at that point, who services the helpers? Who's there to help the helpers? And it was a thought, but didn't last too long. I worked at parole, probation, worked in the Department of Corrections. I worked in a county jail, and I ended up working with several levels of law enforcement. And I just realized that they don't trust very easily, but for some reason they trusted me. And the reason why I think they trusted me was that I worked in the field. They didn't need to explain some of this stuff. And because of that passion, once in a while, I get a friend of mine, good friend of mine, Jay, who is a police officer. He'd be like, "Hey, I've got a guy who needs some help." So I went from working with those who were on parole, probation, diverting their jail time or in the jail, to working with the actual first responders from there. And that's how that transition occurred. And I started getting a lot of more referrals. So the best way I can say is it was my I felt ass backwards, if I can say that on your podcast. I developed a passion of working with first responders. And, today I'll share a little bit that I have a group that I run, 2 groups. They run one at night, one in the morning on 2 days separate by 3 days, so that whoever's on shift, they can always make one of the 2. And we talked about a lot of difficult stuff today. We had 4 people, and I realized that if we talked about all those things and all 4 of them came by like, "Wow, we really trust you." And there's no price for that. And maybe that's my adrenaline, so to speak, that know that people can trust me and they know that they don't need to explain certain things. And that's what keeps me going. So I think that's how I fell into it. I don't know if I went too long, but I love this first responders.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think this translates to, and people hear it all the time from me and from people like you, the importance of finding your niche. And a big clue to that is the things that you're passionate about and the things that speak to you. And that you like you said, just the reward or the knowing you're on the right path because people trust you. And that's I think that's huge as much as anything. So yeah. Well, Steve, one of the things I know we had talked about that before we started recording that we wanted to kind of share with people, because I think there's a lot of good translation here again between the business side with the podcasting world of you changing your branding with the podcast and how you did that and that transition. And I think for people in private practice, that could be a possibility of shifting your branding or even finding a new niche, if you will, and how you make that transition. So tell us how you did what you did with the podcast and what that was like.
Well, Gordon did it all for me. No, seriously.
No.
What happened was I started my podcast, Finding Your Way Through Therapy, because that was the book I created. And the first idea was I would take chapters of the book and talk about it as a podcast. And then it evolved slowly but surely. But then I realized as I went along, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want anyone to ever feel offended, but there's some stuff that we talk about. I go through the motions. I wasn't that interested. And there's nothing against learning how to yodel. No one taught me how to yodel through this. I guess it's a dumb example. But the point is that I'm like, I'm not interested in that. But when I had first responders, or we talked about trauma, we talked about grief, which is, my passion as a therapist, it also showed in my podcast. And my numbers show that. So with all the fear in the world, I decided that maybe I need to rebrand. The other motivation behind that is I talked a little bit about the story about first responders wanting to talk to culturally competent people. Part of it too is that having a lot of first responder, subjects, for lack of a better word, they look at me and they go, oh, I don't need to vet Steve. He knows what he's talking about. I heard him on the podcast. So it was a way to also reach out to a population that probably wouldn't reach out in general, not because they're bad people, but they're not always encouraged to reach out, or it's embarrassing, or you don't know who to trust, or what have you. So at the end of the last year, I started thinking about rebranding, and I did this slow rebranding from Finding Your Way Through Therapy to Finding Your Way to Finding Your Way Resilience Development in Action to Resilience Development in Action right now. And most of the subjects I've talked about since the rebranding, which occurred probably beginning of April, around there, we really talked about first responder stressors, the trauma and the recovery. And that's going to be the theme for the most part. I have a group of guys, if you've listened to the podcast, and I encourage you to go listen to Mental Men, because these are guys, we sit in a room with 5 guys with over 200 years of experiences in the field. And what I told them, I said, okay, let's not talk about what we usually do. Let's keep it to grief, trauma, and first responder stuff. It took a half second for them to adapt, and go listen to that episode. It was episode 194, around there. It just showed me that that's what I wanted to do. And so will there be sometimes exceptions? Of course there will be. When Father's Day comes around, there's going to be a Father's Day special. But in general, it's going to be first responders, because that's the hardest thing to do, is to reach out and find someone who you feel is competent. And obviously there's not just me, there's several hundreds, but they need to know that they have this opportunity. And there's nothing like a podcast to give you that opportunity. And there's not a whole lot. What I've learned, I remember sitting in a meeting with the Psycraft Network folks. Like, well, can you reach out? Like, can you look how many podcasts for first responders exist? There's several, but there's only a handful that are ran by therapists that are not first responders. And I think that becomes important to bring in that humanity of the therapist. And maybe, I didn't carry a bag with me, or I didn't carry an axe or a gun, but I'm able to understand what you've been through. And I think that's the other part which makes it unique. And I think my podcast obviously is awesome, but I might have a vested interest in it.
Yeah. Well, I think people can pick up on authenticity pretty quickly. And when you're authentic and you're genuine with what you do, our friend James Marland was on the podcast a few this as we're recording this week's episode.
It was a good episode.
Yeah. So we were just talking about that authenticity. And I think if you try to be something that you're not, that people see through that immediately. And I think that's one of the things, my brother-in-law is a first responder, or was a first responder. He was in the police, and, worked in law enforcement for years. And we've had conversations about some of his experiences and just a whole different mindset around that, or, really that walking that line between wanting to be very helpful to people, but at the same time dealing with the bad guys and having to, do your job in terms of, taking control of situations and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's, and when you get to know people, my brother-in-law, big shout out to him, Greg, he's got a heart of gold. I mean, he would do anything in the world for you, but at the same time, you wouldn't want to cross him or create a situation or be in a situation where he perceives that somebody's going to get hurt or somebody's going to be in danger. He's there to protect. So, I mean, yeah.
And, the invisible stuff that people don't know about first responders is those weird hours.
Mm-hmm.
And, they don't have HIPAA that we do in therapy, but they do have like a confidentiality stuff. And sometimes you don't want to talk about it. And most people in the community, they see a police officer, whoever first responder, hey, what's your worst story? They don't want to talk about that around the barbecue. Don't ask them those questions, but they may want to come to me and say, you know what, I really saw some XYZ, I'm just making a story up. And they now have that space, but people don't understand that telling your worst story at a barbecue, at a family reunion or whatever, there's no interest in that. In fact, that's just probably traumatizing. And those guys are heart of gold. And like I said to my group this morning, I said, yeah, I wouldn't want to be on the opposite side of all of you. I'm good. I'm on the same side. But they're after, they're fine. They help people and all that. But I don't want to be on the opposite side. And the reason why is that they've seen enough that they know when these things going to occur. And that's sad to say, but it's true. And they need a place where they can talk about those things, because most people don't understand, I didn't go to that meeting or I didn't go to that reunion. And they're like, why? Just didn't feel comfortable with a couple of people. And they're like, don't be that way. Well, no, there's a reason why they're that way. And we got to respect it.
Right. Absolutely. And I think too, my guess would be is that a lot of times the stories and the things that they've gone through and the things that they've seen are pretty horrific kinds of situations. And in a way, not telling that to someone is their way of protecting them from that. Because
100%.
Because internally it's just, it's trauma. Yeah.
And I think that what I've said to people in the community who've said that, like, what's his worst story? Or what's their worst story? I'm like, all right, let's put it in perspective for a second. Whenever you go to any type of social event, I want you to imagine someone comes over and says, what's the worst thing you've ever been through in your life? You'd be like, why the hell would you want to know that? And that's what you're doing to those individuals, And the biggest problem that I find with particular first responders is that we know, me and you, therapists, that were unethical or did something wrong. But it wasn't plastered on the front page of any paper. At best, it made the back page of CNN or whatever, not even, but like the local WXYZ. A police officer does something wrong in Phoenix. It is across the country, and a lot of people will overgeneralize that police officer in Phoenix to every single police officer. Imagine if you had a job like that. Or a firefighter does something wrong in Arizona, and then suddenly all firefighters are like that. We can't comprehend. I certainly do my best, but we can't comprehend how difficult that is. Because if someone said, this bad therapist in Utah did this, well, everyone would be like, that's in Utah, that's not us. They would dismiss that right away. But if it's one of those main first responder jobs, we overgeneralize to the whole population, and that's rough.
Yeah. And I think it's something to be cognizant of in just for those of us, those listening to this particular episode, which are mainly therapists and people in, healthcare of some sort, to keep that in mind, I think is really important in bringing that out. So, so maybe to switch gears a little bit to talk about podcasting, because Steve's been one of the main people in the Sightcraft network, and I'm really grateful for his participation in that. What do you see, Steve, as the benefit of having a podcast and doing things in this form and fashion?
Well, there's so many things. First of all is meeting people like Gordon, and I'm getting close to 100 guests over the course of the last few years in my podcast. You get to meet fantastic people who do fantastic work. And that's one of the biggest benefits. Having a group like the Sightcraft Network is absolutely important to my work, because while you're talking to a microphone, right now I know Gordon's here, but essentially the conversation is me, Gordon, and a microphone or two microphones.
Yeah.
There's no one else. We don't know if there's going to be 100,000 hits on this or one. And at the end of the day, sometimes having that group like the Sightcraft Network where we can bounce ideas off. And we talked about James Marlin, who encouraged me to work on that transition. And I also turned to Lisa McDonald.
Yeah, Chris McDonald. Yes.
Chris. Why am I blanking on Chris's name? They all encourage me to do this. And they all have great shows. I don't do what Lisa does. I don't do what James does. I don't do what Gordon does. I don't do what Chris does. And I know there's other people. There's Julie, and there's other people that are on our group. And Whitney, sorry, Whitney, didn't forget about you. But the point is that having a group like this, there's this camaraderie that we can have. And sometimes, like I work with therapists. Gee, it's so hard to get CEUs. Oh, I know someone who does that. I really want to start creating courses. Oh, I know someone who wants to do that. I don't know how to use AI. Oh, I can help you do AI with so many things. I got someone who does that. These are all podcasts that are available on the Sightcraft Network. And I know whoever's listening to this, they're going to think, oh, Steve's doing a commercial. No one put a gun to my head. I do whatever I want. If you know me at all, I don't do things I don't want to. But it's really what I love. And we had that one YouTube day that we did together. I thought that went really well. And we're going to do those more often and have different points of view sitting around and talk about Sightcraft Network and what each podcast can contribute. And for me, if you want to do none of that, you don't want to talk about Sightcraft Network, you don't want to talk about anything, I get vetted from my experience with first responders by someone listening to a podcast. How many guys who just started with me say, yeah, I was listening to your podcast, seem to know a little bit about us. Like, yeah, I know a couple of things. Read a book. Right. And it brings you that credibility without meeting the person.
Right.
And so I think that that's what it is. If you think that it's something that it's going to make you super rich right away, there's Joe Rogan and then there's us. But the people you touch, the people who write to you, people who tell you how great it is, or they got a good idea out of it, it's priceless. And that's the other reason why podcasting is so important for anyone in the private practice world. Even if you did 6 of them, just introduce who you are. I work with IFS, or internal family systems. I do cognitive behavioral therapy and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And you do 15 minutes of each. Well, now people can go see that podcast. And I know you can listen to Gordon, who does a great how to start a podcast and how to do those things. But getting that out there, instant credibility. You don't need a website. All you need is this distribution center. And there's plenty of good ones that are out there right now. So there's so many advantages to podcasts. I love doing this. I've been doing it as of May 21st. Will be 4 years.
Wow.
And I have no intention to stop. Are there days that are harder than others? Of course. But in general, I love having that podcast. And once in a while, people are like, hey, do you remember the one you did on sleep? No, I don't. Yeah, it would really help me. That's great. It'll help you.
Yeah.
So there's so many matches.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that for those of us that have really kind of a heart for helping people is a podcast is a way for you to go from the one-to-one way of helping people to the one-to-many. And there are different ways to monetize that if you want to. But I think for a lot of us that are doing this, we do it out of a sense of passion for what we do and wanting to get voice to the different issues that we cover or that we talk about. And I think that's what makes it also fun. And with the Sightcraft Network, the whole reason for me to start that is, again, just thinking about, Steve, what you do with the groups that you run, really kind of creating that for people that have podcasts, particularly in this self-help, private practice, mental health space. So, yeah.
And the other part too about podcasting, if you're in the helping field, knowing that I have a great resources down in Tennessee or North Carolina or Texas or traveling. Shout out again. See, didn't forget about you, Whitney.
Yeah.
But the point is that you have these resources that you develop running a podcast. And these are intuitive, like, if it hasn't happened yet in your area, but if someone said, oh, geez, I'm looking for a therapist in Tennessee for my cousin, my brother, my sister, or whatever. Well, I don't know anyone there, but I do know some people who know people there. Hey, Gordon, can you help me out? To me, that's the other part too, is that when you work in private practice, you're isolated. And whoever tells you you're not is BSing you. You got to get out of your shell and not isolate yourself.
Right.
And doing a podcasting removes that isolation, because I have not done this. Gordon has not done this with me, but I'm 100% sure. Hey, Gordon, I have a tough case. Can I just run something by you? Gordon would return my phone call in 2 seconds. And this is from the podcasting, not on the podcast, obviously. But now, because I had a podcast, I got to consult with someone who knows a lot about family, who knows a lot about spirituality and how to integrate that in the treatment of individuals, which is not my strength. And that's the other part of when you talk about what can we do as private practitioners. That's why podcasts are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it creates community as much as anything. And I think that's an really important piece for why I started the network and why we're doing what we're doing and why we do the podcasts. Is it's just being able to connect with people and having a platform for people to connect with us and to hear things. Because the funny thing about podcasts, even though as you're listening to this now, it's a recording, but I bet it feels like you're sitting in the room with us. At least that's how it feels for me when I'm listening to podcasts. It's kind of like you're right there. Yeah.
I go back to how I run my podcast. I think you do the same thing. You probably don't do it the same motivation as I do. But what I tell people is when I start the pre-interview, I always say the same thing. I'm a Howard Stern guy. And what Howard Stern did fantastically and still does to this day is that he makes you forget there's a microphone in front of you. And you start talking and you feel like you're intimately listening to a conversation between two folks. And to me, that's the magic of podcasts. And if you do it well and think about all the podcasts that you enjoy and listen to, that's exactly what you're looking for. I'm not looking for someone going, hi, Gordon, how are you? I'm not looking for mechanical stuff. I can get that anywhere. You can get that on, late night shows or interview shows. But having the genuine, oh, shoot, I'm sitting into a conversation with two people, there's nothing like it. And I think that's what podcasting, that's what the Sightcraft Network has brought me anyway, and really encouraged me to do so.
Right. Well, Steve, I know we've got to be mindful of our time and all, but tell folks how they can get in touch with you. And also you can find Resilience, help me see, Development
in Action.
Yes.
Let's give Gordon a little space. It's brand new.
Right. Yeah, the development part was the word I was struggling over, but so you can find it anywhere you listen to your podcast, but tell folks a little bit more how they can get in touch with you, Steve.
You can get in touch with me with Instagram, Facebook, most social platforms under Real Steve Bisson. And if you want to make it sound French, Real Steve Bisson. My website is steve-bisson.com, Bisson. And you can always email me. And if you go to my podcast, there's a nice little button you press, send a text, and you'll get a text there. If not, you can go to my name, lmhc@gmail.com, and that's an email. 508-902-7845 is my phone number. And I don't read smoke signals yet, but I'm working on it. So I don't know how you cannot not reach me. But feel free to reach me anytime. Gordon knows how I am. I've never met a conversation I don't enjoy. And if I'm busy, I will tell you I'm busy, but we'll get back to it. And I'm always truthful with people.
Yeah. And Steve has a great YouTube channel as well. So
thank you.
Yeah, he does. And it's quite impressive, the number of followers he has now with that. And he's the one, I don't think I ever told you this, Steve. You're the one that kind of prompted me to start putting this podcast on YouTube and getting it out there on that platform. And then, the visual, which I think is always fun as well. But
thank you.
We'll have all the links here in the show notes and the show summary for people, and you'll be hearing from Steve Bisson more here on this podcast and also the Sightcraft Network. So thanks, Steve.
And Gordon's coming on my podcast too in a couple of weeks. So
yes, that's correct. That's correct. Yes, it is. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Well, a big thanks to Steve for joining me on the podcast. He is such a genuine person, and I really appreciate him being part of the Sightcraft Network. And also I consider him a friend. He's, Steve is one of those people, is what you see is what you get. And he's just really the real deal. And he's doing just such incredible work with his clients, and also just in the world of helping people understand their trauma, and particularly first responders. So again, check out his podcast, Resilience, Development, and Action. And you'll find links here in the show notes as always. And also big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are just doing an incredible job of just staying on top of all the new developments now with AI support and just being able to quickly write your progress notes with the support of AI generators. It's pretty amazing stuff, really. And it's also, very HIPAA secure. So I'd invite you to go over and check it out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And be sure and use that promo code Gordon, just GORDON, to try them out for 2 months for free. I couldn't get along without them in my practice. So be sure and check them out. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're interested in doing some consulting or working with me, I'm open to that. And I'm looking for new consulting clients that want to do some deeper work with their learning how to grow their practice and really figuring out all the different things that you need to know and scaling and growing your practice. So you can check that out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/coaching and consulting. And also, I didn't mention it at the beginning, but I'd love for you to check out my friend Ashley's online store, mentalhealthwaretn.com. And again, she is constantly coming up with new designs and new ways to show pride in your profession, but also help with all the mental health awareness swag that you would want to find. So be sure and check it out, mentalhealthwaretn.com. And again, there'll be links in the show notes and show summary here for you to get to that quickly. So thanks again, folks, for joining me. Looking forward to more episodes. Got a lot of great guests lined up, and hope you're having a good start to the summer as this particular episode is coming out. And we'll be with you again next week for another episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Sightcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting sightcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.